Welcome to episode 13 of Let's Rage Together, a podcast where two friends talk about the politics of total liberation and related topics.
We annihilated the world before your very ears.
You can't handle the truth.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 13 of Let's Rage Together. I'm Pete.
And I'm Taryn.
And today we are dissecting the language used by people within the animal rights movement and discussing why the words we use in our activism and when we are talking about non-human animals matter.
And if this is the first time that you're listening to our podcast, if you have any questions or feedback or anything like that, you can email us. We have a new email address. Shout out to Adam for telling us we were super unprofessional having a Gmail account. So we almost set up a new email address, Adam at letsragetogether.co.za.
Didn't we set that up? I'm sure we did.
No, we didn't.
Oh, okay.
But nearly.
Sorry, Adam.
But you can reach us on...
Mail at letsragetogether.co.za. M-A-I-L.
Yes, not mail, M-A-L-E, please. Our other email address, letsragetogetherpodcast@gmail.com, is still active if you want to use that. But if you want to be legit and professional, you can use the legit one. You can also check out our website, letsragetogether.co.za. And there we have links to our PayPal and Patreon links if you want to support the podcast, if you want to help us make it more sustainable and help us keep doing what we're doing.
We also have links to our social media accounts on that site. So we're on Facebook and Instagram. So yeah, if you want to spread the word, go to letsragetogether.co.za, click all the things.
Yeah, and as always, if you can't support us on Patreon or with a once-off PayPal donation, we also have some merch that you can buy once-off. We have really cool mugs and stickers and tote bags and things like that are a bonus for Patreon supporters. And in addition to that, if you just want to help us out, a huge, really rad way you can do that is to write a review for us on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And you can share our posts, share episodes with friends that you think would find it interesting, and generally just help to get the word out.
Yeah.
And before we delve into the main topic today, we just have one listener question. So Pete, do you want to read the email that we got?
Yeah, sure. So we got an email from our friend Philippa who says, "Hey Taryn and Pete." I'm really offended that you came before me, but I'm joking. "Hey Taryn and Pete. Just want to say how much I look forward to your podcasts and for the opportunity to tap into your brains. So thank you, like big time. I found the last podcast extremely insightful, especially regarding what goes on behind the scenes with all the different activist organizations. I obviously understand that it is important to know this stuff, but it's not always information that the average person who just wants to get involved in activism has access to. As a new vegan 2 years ago, I just needed to be around other vegans, especially vegans getting the message out there. And I was so thrilled to have found AV in Joburg." She's talking about Anonymous for the Voiceless. "Coming to the cubes of truth was my calm in the storm of life amongst ignorant people. I don't know how I would have coped with all the anti-vegan people in my life without having joined AV last year. Besides the awesome like-minded people I got to meet, especially you guys, the educational aspect was massive. I was also introduced to people who got me more involved in other areas of activism. Even though there was all the shit going on in the background with what AV was and is doing with their merchandise, I gained more from being part of AV in those early days when you were running it, Taryn, than I could ever describe." So Taryn was the Anonymous for the Voiceless Johannesburg organizer and for a while the Africa regional organizer, right?
Yeah.
"I don't want people, especially new activists who are listening to your podcast, to shy away from or be discouraged from joining organizations like AV because of shit going on at the top, especially in the case of what AV was doing in terms of their business model. In my experience, I found their model of street activism quite effective, and there was a huge value in it. I'd rather vegan activists be standing in a cube of truth and doing outreach at AV than sitting at home depressed and lonely and fed up with the world. I cannot speak for the other organizations like Direct Action Everywhere, and there I completely agree with you because of the whole cult aspect, which really freaked me out and I had no idea of, and also how there is not enough planning in terms of what happens to the animals they rescue. That was massive food for thought, and I was so grateful to learn that from your podcast. I know this is a long email, but I really just wanted to speak up for AV, even though I'm not that involved anymore because of my involvement with the SAVE movement and other activism, because I was truly grateful to find you guys through AV and join a community of like-minded people. Big love to both of you, and I'm really looking forward to your next show. Warm regards, Philippa. Thanks, Philippa. Warm regards back to you.
Yeah, and big love back at you as well. Thanks, Philippa. So, Philippa, I completely see where you're coming from, and I understand that, it's really important for new vegans, especially to have that sense of community. And I get what you're saying about, rather being active than sitting at home, depressed and feeling isolated. And I think there's a lot of benefit in many forms of activism in terms of the sense of community that it forms. And I completely agree. That is an important part of activism and an important part of finding a community, and in terms of, helping new vegans to stay vegan and to feel supported and understood and all of those things. So just to clarify for everyone listening, Philippa is talking about episode 11, where we spoke about whether or not all activists are worth supporting.
So episode before last, not the last episode.
Yeah. So if you haven't checked that out yet, you can do so to get a bit of context. So as someone who used to run an AV chapter, the problem that we mentioned with the merchandise and the fact that they run as a company was kind of a small part of the issue that we had. A lot of it also has to do with the values that they promote and things like that, like the London organizer saying things like Trump supporters should be marching alongside climate change activists and
men's rights activists alongside feminists.
Yeah, which is ridiculous. So I think that is really problematic, and that's something that shouldn't be ignored because it's invalidating the experience of a lot of potential activists.
Well, not only did they ignore it, but they actively agreed with that logic.
Yeah, exactly. So, I understand where you're coming from, Philippa, and I feel like AV also, my involvement there also helped me to become more active. It helped me to meet a lot more vegans and activists and get inspired to do more. But the point that we're trying to make is really that the kind of activism that AV does is not a new form of activism. It's been around for a really long time.
At least like 40 years, people have been doing street outreach.
Yeah. So we're not saying don't do activism. We are saying be critical of the kinds of organizations that you support. And the reason that I stayed involved for as long as I did is because the chapters are run in many ways very independently. So I always personally had the approach of zero tolerance for like racism, sexism, anything like that. And I think I made that quite clear, at least I hope I did. The thing is, when you remain associated with that name and with that branding, it's like an acquiescence to everything that they stand for. And when you have the founders of the organization doing a lot of shady stuff with finances and supporting people like Gary Yourofsky overtly, and
literally calling him the greatest activist of all time.
Yeah, that to me can't be overlooked. And I would rather say to new vegans, get involved with a different group or start something else. And I also acknowledge the problem with that, the problem with being a new vegan, feeling overwhelmed just by the sheer amount of information, the kind of secondary trauma of being exposed to a lot of footage, or, dealing with family members and friends who don't understand the kind of change in lifestyle that you're going through and all of that. So I'm not trying to downplay or discount the importance of being able to find a community you can just slot into. And I realize that not even for new vegans, but a lot of vegans don't necessarily have the drive or the personality type to think, I'm just going to start my own group. That's kind of a hard thing to do. It's not easy to just start something up and to mobilize people and to get them to listen and to get them to be excited and motivated to do something. That is quite intimidating. And speaking from experience as someone who's quite introverted, it's not easy to stand in front of a group of people who are looking to you for guidance. Like, hey, what do we do now? So I understand that it's hard for a lot of people to just start something new. But we were just saying be critical of who you join, because if you're going to overlook a lot of problematic stuff, it's kind of easy to say, let's overlook that because it's a way for people to get active instead of being depressed at home. I agree with that in a sense. Yes, get active, but we are basically challenging people who have done activism and who are already active and who know better to start better groups, to realize we don't need this international, big, well-known brand to tell us how to do activism. There's lots of different kinds of activism you can do. There's lots of ways you can do it. You don't have to, use that branding at all. And to AV's credit, they have said many times that you are welcome to use the exact format to the T, do the same kind of thing under your own branding or no branding or whatever, and just not call it AV. And you can do the same thing. So why not do that? So we're basically challenging people who have the capacity to do that, to start groups, so that new vegans have a more welcoming place to go, where everyone is respected and understood, and, you know, human rights issues are not being ignored, environmental issues are not being ignored.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I really don't like this idea that like there's the suit created in America or Australia or whatever that you can just import and put on. You know what I mean? So even the same with the save vigils, like people have been doing vigils outside of slaughterhouses also for like 40 years. You can make your own signs and stuff. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be involved with the save movement or even that you shouldn't be involved with AV if somehow you can logic yourself past all of the shit. But it's not something that you have to wait for some bigger power to do and send you stuff and purchase stuff from them. I think it's bullshit that you have to report like tallies back to AV. There's like lots of problematic stuff. So yeah, I mean, even Taryn and I are part of an animal rights group here. It hasn't been very active recently, but it is going to be soon, called Animal Liberation Collective, where we also do street outreach. You know, and it's not under the branding of AV. No one has to even record how many, what did they say, people taking veganism seriously.
Yeah.
There's no way to measure that.
I think when it comes to dealing with new vegans and new activists, this is the issue, is that if we ignore internal issues within an organization for the benefit of the animals, or to just have a space to be active, we're opening up a situation where new activists are getting fed these same messages and continuing those problematic ways of thinking, because that's all they're hearing. So basically, I think we were just challenging current activists to start better groups, to question the groups that you're part of, and to make changes where there are problems.
Yeah, just so that, you know, where Philippa says, I'd rather vegan activists be standing in a cube of truth and doing outreach at AV than sitting at home depressed and lonely and fed up with the world, just so that those aren't the only two options.
Yeah. And I just want to make it clear as well that I would never discourage anyone from doing any kind of activism. I definitely think there are very effective forms of activism and very ineffective forms of activism, but I don't claim to know what is and isn't effective and to what degree. I know what I personally am averse to and what I personally think is more effective, even though I don't think anyone's figured out the way to make the world vegan, because otherwise it would happen. But I think these conversations that we have are not really palatable to a lot of people, because we probably seem to be criticizing just about everything, but we are just thinking critically to make the movement stronger. And if there's a new activist that says, oh, I'm so excited, I went to my first AV demo, you know what, I'm not going to bash them. I'm going to be like, that's rad. Do you know this about the organization? Like, have you thought about this kind of activism? Have a conversation, not to discourage them at all, but to create an environment where there are these critical conversations happening, so that everyone is included. Everyone feels empowered to be active in a space that is welcoming of everyone and acknowledges the intersections of different forms of oppression.
Completely agree. Well said, Taryn.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Philippa. That was a cool mail, and we'd love to hear from anyone else about anything else you have to say.
Definitely. So, moving on to the bad and the rad.
It's time for the bad and the rad.
If this is the first time you're joining us and you don't know about this segment, the bad and the rad is basically a short little discussion we have about anything we think is either bad or rad, or sometimes an in-between. And it's just something we want to discuss that doesn't warrant a full episode, but which we think is deserving of a short discussion. So I don't think I have anything today for a change, but Pete, do you have any bads or rads?
I just have a maybe today. So I'm sure anyone who's listening who's vegan by now would have seen everyone sharing the trailer for this new documentary coming out called The Game Changers, which, as far as I can tell, is about plant-based athletes. Elite plant-based athletes. So they feature people like Scott Jurek, the ultramarathon runner, like Novak Djokovic, the tennis player, I forgot his name, but the Olympic weightlifting dude for America. A lot of elite athletes who, I don't know necessarily if they all identify as vegan, but it's definitely plant-based. So the reason why I'm calling it a maybe instead of a rad is that I don't know what approach they're going to take. So I'm hoping that it's going to be the approach of, hey, I'm an elite athlete who trains for like 10 hours a day and have huge muscles, or I'm super fast or whatever, and I'm one of the best in the world, and I've managed to achieve this being vegan. So there's no reason why you shouldn't be vegan, because you can not only survive but like get to the point I am by being vegan. I hope that's the stance they're going to take, and it's not going to be this thing of the vegan overpromising cure-all thing of I was like a pretty average athlete and then I went vegan and now I'm amazing because of veganism. So that's what I don't want, because I feel like that angle is going to be super problematic, is going to hurt the vegan movement and the animal rights movement. It's a lie to overpromise veganism, that anyone who goes vegan is not going to get sick or get fat or, you know.
Aren't you an athlete yet, Pete?
No. But the problem with that approach, I feel like, is it opens up a lot of room for food, fat, and disease shaming, which is like really already way too prevalent within the animal rights community. So that's why it's a maybe for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from watching the trailer, it seems like it's going to be more a case of, look how well we perform. Also, we're vegan, and since going vegan, our performance has improved in these ways. You know, you see the doctor doing like a cholesterol before and after and all of that. My worry is also in the one clip, there's a doctor saying, you know, there's not one diet for cholesterol and one for high blood pressure and one for whatever. It's all the same thing. So, yeah, there's science to back all of that, you know, a plant-based diet can improve all of those things. But I also, like you, hope that it's not you will definitely be amazing and healthy and cure all of these things, you know, framing it as a definite cure for every single person.
And
but
a weight loss diet. And
yeah, but it seems to be more a case of, you know, these athletes are good. Now they switch to plant-based diet, or some of them are already on it, and they do better and they're surprised, and that's cool. But I also am wary of like the fat shaming or those kind of aspects. But
I don't even like the angle of we do better. Like, I feel like even that is overpromising, because there's many people who aren't vegan who are elite athletes and are better. You know what I mean?
But you could show that an individual making that switch shows definite improvements in things like cholesterol and performance and things like that. I don't think that's an overpromise, as long as they don't frame it as I improved, so you will definitely improve as well. As long as they're not making these like sweeping statements that cannot be proven.
I mean, I think the strongest way it could come across is just to show how amazing these athletes are, and they happen to be vegan.
Yeah, kind of like anything you can do, I can do vegan.
Yeah,
full stop,
that's all. I mean, like, I would appreciate it more if they just didn't say anything, because then it also has the potential to be like other documentaries where there's like these massive claims that people can Google search and refute.
Anecdotal evidence.
Yeah, like there was quite a bit of that in What the Health, and I think it hurt the documentary, to be honest. So in terms of wanting a strong animal rights and vegan movement with solid logic, I feel like there needs to be just fact-based stuff and no overpromising.
Yeah, hopefully it will be that.
So yeah, that's a maybe. Let's see.
I don't imagine it's going to be this groundbreaking like thing that makes everyone suddenly understand like animal rights ethics and all of that as well. It's definitely targeted. Well, I say definitely. It's probably targeted at the more self-focused individual who's all about health and fitness and very much on like personal gain.
Yeah, which is fun as well, because I mean, it's hopefully it will also just smash any argument that you can't get enough calories or protein or whatever being vegan.
I think that's what it's going to do, hopefully, but we'll see. But yeah, I don't think there's too much else to say about that till we've seen it.
So maybe radish, badish.
Yeah. If by the time you listen to this, you have watched it already, when does it even come out?
I don't know.
But when it comes out, if you watch this and then listen to this episode, let us know what you think. So moving on to the main topic of discussion. Today we're going to be chatting about language, specifically in the context of animal rights activism, because language tends to not only convey but also perpetuate oppressive norms, and that's no different within the animal rights movement. And I've definitely heard a lot of activists, even when advocating for animals, using language that perpetuates a lot of the problematic things that we're trying to tackle. So we thought we'd just have a very brief and pretty basic discussion about language in this context, and just kind of highlight the ways that this happens, and, you know, remind everyone to be a bit more mindful about the words we use and the way that we speak about animals.
Yeah, so don't tune out now if you aren't vegan or involved in animal rights, because the same kind of thinking and logic applies, I guess, across all movements.
Yeah, and I think in general, just being mindful about the language we use. There's a lot of things that we say that has a lot of implication and a lot of different kind of connotations that we might not necessarily think about, and that can impact those around us as well. So as a pretty basic starting point, since we are talking predominantly about speaking about animals, one very common thing that tends to occur is the objectifying of animals through the pronouns like it or that, speaking about animals as if they are objects.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And I think that it begins from basically birth, you know, from childhood, like the influences you have. So, I mean, I was trying to think about this and think about how do we speak about this? Because obviously as adults, you can say, oh, you know, marketers perpetuate it or whatever. But I think that you learn earlier to objectify animals in your language and think of animals as lesser in your language from like birth, basically.
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree with that, in the sense that speciesism starts from very early on, if you're not raised in a vegan household, for example.
Yeah, that's
so
what I mean.
I think there's an important distinction to be made as well in how we objectify different animals to different degrees. So if you were raised in a household where you had companion animals, firstly, they would be referred to as pets. So that implies some kind of benefit to humans from like an entertainment, companionship kind of perspective, but
Security,
but not really acknowledging the lived experience of that individual animal. So they are here to function as our pets. They are here to serve a purpose, even in the situation of, oh, it's your birthday, I'm going to buy you a puppy for your birthday. Like, this is a gift to be given. So that's where it already gets confusing, because in a sense we are objectifying and exploiting these animals for our own gain. But often in those situations, if you were raised in a household where it's kind of, oh, our pets are part of the family, you know, we care about them, they sleep inside, they are one of us, you know, that becomes confusing, because then you would refer to your companion animals generally as he or she.
I think because that you name them.
Yeah.
So again, language comes in as being so important, because once you give an animal a name, no one's going to say, oh, I threw the ball for Josie, it's jumped so high.
Yeah, she jumped so high.
Yeah.
So that's where it becomes confusing, because as children we are taught this named animal has a gendered pronoun.
Already enforcing gender binary as well.
Yeah. But look, we can't exactly ask animals what their gender, their preferred gender is. But, you know, we're, as a form of like sex identification, we are giving them a sex pronoun. And we are acknowledging them as individuals. But at the same time, if that household is not vegan, there's likely to be discussions around other animals being referred to as it.
Yeah, and I think even the naming and referring to he, she is still not the same kind of weight as people who get speciesism would explain to their children, because many of these people will buy their pets from breeders or from pet shops. And so still the naming of the animals and using he, she is kind of this like demeaning, kind of condescending thing, because when the animals die, it's very easy to, and a really bad example, I think, to children, to show, oh, if your animal dies, we can just go to the pet shop and buy a new one. Or
it's
go
just
to
a replaceable toy, basically.
Like a piece of furniture.
Yeah, so I think that's why it becomes confusing, because there's this vague acknowledgement and then a retraction of that when it's suitable. And I think for some households, and probably more so in previous decades or whatever, where so-called pets were also seen, like you said, as like guard dogs, or you know,
they don't sleep inside,
or sleep outside. I can definitely recall hearing people say, oh, the dog's so filthy, get it outside. objectifying that animal. So I think that's changed a little bit as things like animal welfare have become more prominent in like public discourse. So we are acknowledging that animals suffer and that they feel pain and all of those things. So there is more of an individual recognition from a household perspective, but that doesn't tend to extend to farmed animals, for example, where, you'll be taught from a young age that animals are there as resources and will be referred to as such.
There's very, very quickly in childhood a distinction made between these are the pets we love. They aren't the same as the animals we're eating. They aren't the same as the leather that's wrapping the couch, which is more important than the pet.
Yeah, and that again is why it's confusing, because we are taught from a young age that these ideas are compatible, that you can love and recognize this individual while treating them as kind of a resource. Like pets are an entertainment resource, so you can use them to fulfill fun. And, it doesn't matter that maybe a dog is sitting at home for 10 hours in the day, as long as they're there, to play with the kids when they get home, and that's all that matters, So I think that creates a lot of underlying confusion that isn't really ever brought to the forefront, but it's teaching these ideas that you can love someone and not really acknowledge them.
Yeah, which is wild.
Yeah.
Not all the blame is on parents. It's basically any kind of authority
It's social
figure.
conditioning.
Yeah. So, I mean, even if you think about then in school level from young, you taught things, well, hopefully not anymore in any schools, but like the food pyramid, for example, where there you already, you remove, say, the individual label of fish for fish to be a label as like a group of food you need to eat. So people hear fish, generally it depends what context it's used in, but they won't think a group of individuals swimming around. They will think a food group.
Yeah.
Or chicken is a food group. It's not a being with his or her or their own interests,
Chicken especially I find interesting because, when we talk about food pyramids and food classifications and things like that, and the way that we rename so-called food products from animals to make it more of a euphemism, we don't say cow's flesh, we say beef. We don't say cow secretions, we say milk. We don't say pig flesh, we say pork or bacon. But chicken to me is interesting because we're using the name of the animal, same as lamb. But I think the important distinction there, and I think this is mentioned in Carol J. Adams' Sexual Politics of Meat, where she says
amazing book.
Yeah, there is still a distinction. So when you say I'm eating chicken for dinner or I'm eating lamb for dinner, you don't say I am eating a chicken. You say chicken as if it's an object. And I think there's a huge difference if you just think for a second of the imagery that comes to mind. When any individual says, I'm eating chicken, what do you visualize? First thing?
Yeah.
Cooked flesh.
Cooked flesh, yeah.
If you say, I went to a sanctuary yesterday and I saw chickens, or a chicken.
A chicken.
First visual, living animal. So even though the word is the same, there are these linguistic mechanisms for changing that imagery and that connotation immediately. It's the same word, but in our mind, we are seeing different things. So when we talk about chicken, a lot of vegans will think like, oh, you're talking about a dead animal right now. But what we need to realize also in our activism is when we are speaking to people and they are talking about chickens, we might have this like visceral reaction to like, you're talking about a dead animal. They haven't made that connection yet. So they are visualizing literally what they think is food.
Exactly. Like it's the same word, but one is small c, one is capital C.
Yeah.
One is proper noun, one is general noun. It's quite nuanced. And same with lamb. You would want to say baby sheep.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really interesting.
And also just in terms of these kind of objectifications and going back to the use of the word it, what even a lot of activists still do that makes me cringe every time I hear it is where you're trying to get someone to acknowledge, for example, why would you love a dog and not love a pig or whatever? But they will still use the word thing. You're objectifying the animal by saying, how can you eat something that feels? It's not a something.
We shouldn't kill things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And it comes out almost as second nature because that's how we've been raised to speak. But to say, I couldn't eat something with eyes, you're already objectifying that animal.
By saying something, yeah.
Yeah, it's a someone. So similar to using the word it, calling an animal a thing in any context is also objectifying.
And it is very infused in our language. You know, you could also be fully vegan, understand speciesism, and then talk about, you know, if you kick a pig, it suffers.
And I've done that plenty. I still sometimes have to like catch myself, especially if the animal is kind of far removed from the context and you don't know whether they're a male or a female animal and you don't have any like personal connection. It's easy to say, oh, I saw this animal hit by a car. It looked injured. It's easy to jump to those rather than saying they looked injured.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think media has a large part to play as well in terms of speciesism and the language. I don't know necessarily about objectifying language because you'll still talk about wild animals as it, even though it's like a taboo to eat wild animals in a way. Not always. Sometimes blows my mind what kind of biltong and stuff you can buy at game reserves. Biltong is salted dried meat, which is a South African delicacy for those who are listening who aren't from South Africa. But
because we're an international podcast with many fans.
Yeah. But you know how many of the movies that you'll watch as a child will feature wild animals. So there now you already, from really early on, have these three categories of you love these animals. These animals we can eat and exploit how we want to, and they are far removed. And then these animals are the ones worth protecting that we can go look at on holidays. And we're not going to explain why they are worth protecting or whatever, but they are worth protecting and we don't eat those ones.
But even then, going back to your point earlier about naming has such an impact and seeing individuals. So I think if you are visiting a game reserve or whatever, firstly, game reserve, problem.
Yeah, I've also always thought that is an issue. Sounds like you have a reserve tank of animals that are known as game, which makes it sound like they're just waiting around for hunters to come and shoot them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's easy then to say we saw giraffe as a group, not we saw many giraffes.
Or we saw 5 giraffe or something. Yeah,
like we saw giraffe, category, tick, you know, these things that are on a list of things to see. And I think naming is so important when you have like these famous animals for whatever reason, like Cecil the lion or whatever, you know. Also then when you have wild animals in captivity, like in zoos or rehabilitation centers. I mean, even in some of my lectures where there are discussions of like animal welfare, it's so strange how our language switches and changes, where you'll hear even scientists in the field of animal welfare who understand that animals are sentient will switch between, oh, there was this monkey named Joe and he had this happen and he had this happen. So we got a vet in to help him with this. And then within a sentence, it will switch to, we have to be concerned with its welfare.
Wow, yeah.
It just switches from
so
like,
removed.
We're talking about a named animal to the group of captive animals that now become objects. I find it really strange. And same thing with like on a game drive, if you were to see an elephant, oh, he's so beautiful. But then in the next sentence, you'll objectify all animals in one sweeping statement.
A very similar word to game reserves would be livestock, right?
Yes, exactly.
So
living stock, literally.
Yeah, like the animals are doing nothing more than being alive to keep the meat in their bodies okay to eat.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a stockpile of living objects to exploit.
Yeah, like they aren't commodities on a shelf. They aren't stock.
Well, legally they are.
Yeah, legally, you know, because you get personal property under law, right?
Yeah.
So
even when you're doing activism, if you say, think about how the livestock are treated, you are then reinforcing that idea that animals are stock. Even words like dairy. I sometimes talk about dairy, but it's actually problematic that we are then looking at it as a food group. Or even meat, the word meat. Do you eat meat? No. Do you eat animal flesh?
Yeah,
because that's what it is.
I often find people's reactions are so different if you say, do you eat animals?
Yeah, they're almost on their back foot immediately, but not in a bad way. They're just like, oh, okay, that's I can't argue that because that's what it is.
But I think there is this instinctive first response of like, I don't eat it. Why would I? Okay.
I do, yes. Yeah. And some people will think like, oh, you're being so dramatic, but it's literally just
Truth.
calling it what it is. Yeah.
So what other influences do you think we get throughout our lives? That's, we spoke about media, school, parents.
Well, I think going back to the discussion about school and upbringing and things like that, there's this perpetual fallacy that animals either are given to us by God or whatever people believe in, or the fallacy of them giving themselves. So it really gets to me when people talk about how, I remember having a conversation with someone who has backyard chickens, and she says, yeah, we use their eggs, but it's the rent they pay for us feeding them and all of this. And I'm like, where was the agreement?
So
there was no consent to that. You put them there and you take their eggs, and now you say, oh, we've agreed, you give me these eggs, I will give you food. And it's like they didn't agree to that.
I think it's that it comes from that kind of creationism myth, very prevalent in religion. So South Africa is a very religious country, but I mean, even in countries like Europe, they have that like Calvinistic influence and background, and many religions and cultures have a very similar kind of creation story of how, humans are this pinnacle of creation, and then God gave us like all of the animals to, well, you wouldn't use the word take, but made all the animals to give us their stuff.
Yeah.
Like you were saying. But it's not just in childhood, because I've also, like you, heard adults talk about how bees give us honey, how cows give us milk. And it's a myth that is never really corrected for many people.
I think what I find most shocking in this sense is when you have hunters saying this. So when a hunter will say, but I'm an ethical hunter, I'll eat the whole animal, it's subsistence, and it's better than factory farming. Yeah, it is better than factory farming, but you know what? Hitting someone with your fist is better than hitting them with a bat. It doesn't make it better. Anyway, but basically when hunters say, we use all the meat they give us and we are so grateful for their sacrifice, like you literally killed them. So
yeah, I mean, I think we should make a distinction, though. We aren't talking about like indigenous nomadic gatherer hunter tribes and stuff. We're talking about people in like the industrialized world
who choose to hunt as sport and frame it as, oh, I'm being such an eco warrior subsistence hunter while I'm in my fancy cottage and can go anywhere to buy anything.
Well, exactly. It's not even truly subsistence.
No,
you know what I mean?
They're just calling it that.
So we aren't saying that we have an ethical issue with indigenous hunting practices and things like that. We are calling out like westernized and industrialized people who hunt under these like bullshit reasons
and out of choice.
Yeah,
and will admit that they enjoy the process of hunting.
Yeah, just in case anyone thought we were falling into this like underlying racist vibe that a lot of vegans seem to have about indigenous people.
So I think that whole giving versus taking distinction is important. Like cows don't give us milk, bees don't give us honey, we literally take these things. Yeah,
the language of giving and taking. Yeah, that's a massive thing, I think, because people believe it. I don't think once you're told this animal gives us this product, you are really ever challenged to question it, unless you meet someone who challenges you or you draw the conclusion by yourself. But it's almost like this thing that you told in childhood, and you believe this myth into adulthood if you aren't ever corrected.
Yeah, you can almost hear the memories of primary school classes. Like, what do cows give us? Milk.
Exactly.
What do bees give us? Honey.
Which is funny because it's actually a super childish way to think, but it prevails throughout into adulthood and old age.
Yeah. Then I think something we maybe should have mentioned quite early on is the distinction between using the word animals versus non-human animals. I think this is important in general conversation and in activism, because a lot of activists will still make the distinction, animals suffer, animals this, animals that. But it's important in those kind of conversations where you're trying to get people to understand speciesism to make sure you use the word non-human animals to remind them that we are also animals.
Yeah,
it's not an us and them. We are all animals.
I think that also you can go even more nuanced and complicated with using that term, Because
we spoke about this a while ago and we kind of got into a bit of a spiral.
Because I wish there was a term, because you kind of set the bar when you say non and then the bar thing. So you like non-human animals is like still kind of less than.
It's kind of species has
Less
been
than
saying
language?
that it's
Yeah.
like non-default.
No one
It's kind of
says
like saying non-white.
yeah instead of people of color or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. It's saying white is the default or human is the default.
Mm.
Pete and I had a long discussion about this, trying to think of a better term than non-human animals.
Yeah. Like send us your creative ideas for the term.
My issue with this debate is, what is the point of making that distinction? Because we are all animals of different species. We all have different characteristics. So you can't say like non-intelligent or less intelligent, because then you're using intelligence as the bar. You can say animals other than humans. That's probably a little bit better, but it's a bit cumbersome.
Yeah, it's long. That
No one's going to
sucks
say,
yeah.
even like typing non-human animals a million times is a bit of a mission.
Yeah.
But I think there was an author, I can't remember who said something to the effect of animals other than humans.
Okay.
And in an academic paper, and then just said hereafter referred to as animals, or used an abbreviation, which also is to me a little bit tedious and cumbersome.
I mean, there's thought of non-indigenous animals or something, but because you weren't here first and we've removed ourselves so far, but then it also cuts out domestic species.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not their fault they're here.
Yeah. I mean, you could get like moralistic about it to say like pure animals or like innocent animals or something, like.
Yeah, but then you would be referring to like newborn babies too.
Yeah, it would also be speciesist in the misanthropic, like anti-human sense.
Yeah, what is
So,
innocence then?
Yeah, like
So-
is humanity as a species innocent at all?
Yeah.
So
Lots of philosophical debates that can be had here that we're probably not equipped for.
if you have an idea for a term we could use for non-human animals, drop us an email on mail@letsragetogether.co.za.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. But for now, I think it's better to say non-human animals than to just say humans versus animals, because
Yeah.
that creates this like us and them separation.
Even if you're just using, like you said, just animals, just saying animals are this, animals this, you're excluding humans.
Yeah, and you're making a distinction like we are superior somehow and we're not animals. And yeah, that's problematic. And I think that can be linked to the next kind of point of discussion in terms of things like vivisection. So when we're talking about animal research and testing, a big problem, and this also applies to farming and agricultural industries, where animals, as we said, are not only not named, but they are numbered and commodified. So, it will be like test subject 1, same thing as cow number 368.
And I've heard that they discourage medical students and whoever from naming the animals in case there's becomes this emotional attachment. But I can't back that up. I mean, I've just heard that.
I do remember reading a study about research that was done with beagles, and I can't remember what it was about exactly. I think it was to do with aggression or obedience. I would have to look it up. But I remember there being a situation where there were specific handlers for specific dogs, where they would have to kind of create a bond because they were feeding them and interacting with them and teaching them things. And there were actually researchers fired who got too close to the animal and, formed a bond with them, and the dogs were kind of too attached to them. So I can't remember all the details, but it was really problematic stuff like that, where just acknowledging the individual can lose you your job.
Well, I guess they could see it as it could skew the research.
Yeah.
Because you might show some more mercy or...
Yeah, so going back to the idea of vivisection and animal testing, aside from it being kind of morally unjustifiable, some people might argue, but we need medications to be tested and all of that. The thing is, there's huge amounts of research that show that animal testing is a really, really bad idea. It's not very well transferred to human studies anyway. So the vast majority of clinical trials that pass on animals, so essentially if a new medication is tested on rats, for example, or mice, it could be shown unequivocally to work, and still the majority of clinical trials will fail in humans. Similarly, we can overlook cures because they don't work in the test subject animal and transfer that to human clinical trials, and it might work. But we kind of stop at the non-human animal barrier if it doesn't work, whereas we could be missing out on a lot of cures. So there's a lot of research that backs up the fact that it's just ineffective, it's bad science, It's bad for animal ethics as a whole, and it's not effective. It's not a good way to find cures. So that argument is really, really flawed. But again, when we talk about the distinction between humans and animals, it's important that we say non-human animals instead of just animals, humans, because we are all animals. And I find it such a weird contradiction where when people are kind of arguing for animal testing, they'll say we need to test on animals to see if it will work so that we can save more lives and not harm animals. So they're already speciesist in their thinking that, it's better to kill 1,000 mice than people doing those tests, So they're looking at it as a sense of like those animals being inferior. So they're saying animals are similar enough to us to be able to test medications on them. They are enough of a research analog to transfer to us. So they're willing to acknowledge that similarity. Then when you say, okay, well, if they're so similar, why are we harming them? Surely that's an ethical problem to say you are enough like me to test this thing on you. But if you are enough like me to test this thing on you, surely I shouldn't be testing it on you from an ethical perspective.
But they aren't like us.
Then it's suddenly, no. They're not really like us. Yeah. They're totally different. They're animals. We're humans. We are different. We are superior. We are worthy of moral consideration. So it's just completely nonsensical.
Yeah, we're testing them because they are like us. It's okay though because they aren't like us.
Yeah, solid logic.
What about when we dress up animals? I think that's, that anthropomorphic, like try to make them human seeming so they're cuter. Or like even in media, make animals speak. I mean, there's lots of ways that we anthropomorphize animals. I think that has a huge part to play in the language that we use.
Yeah, so I think this is also a very interesting debate because on the one hand, scientists who use anthropomorphic kind of justifications, so justifications that liken animals to humans as two distinct categories to be likened, a lot of those scientists will get criticized because they're saying, you're just projecting your own emotions onto the animals. But the thing is, it's interesting because it is actually a scientific practice because we have looked at brain anatomy and all of that and seen all these parallels. So it makes logical scientific sense to draw those parallels because if they have the same brain anatomy, it stands to reason that they might have similar emotional, mental, and whatever capacities. We might not be able to tell in what way, but we can infer. And a lot of science is inference like that. You have to sometimes make those logical jumps. So on the one hand, anthropomorphism is scientific within reason. You're making logical inferences and you're saying that non-human animals are like us in these certain ways because we have enough scientific evidence to show that they behave and respond and have similar anatomy in these certain ways. So in that sense, I think it's really important because it's also the only way we can understand other animals. We can't communicate with them the same way we can communicate among our own species. So we need to have that bit of anthropomorphic quality underlying what we do, because if, for example, your dog is cowering in a corner, you liken that to the experience you have of humans cowering in a corner. What does that mean? Fear. You have to use those. We do it with each other. I mean, I can't read your mind. You can't read my mind. So it makes sense for me to make inferences from your behavior as to what you feel, what you think, and all of that. It's not ever going to be 100% accurate, but it's necessary. So we have to make inferences to understand each other and therefore to understand other animals. So I think that criticism is flawed and we need those kind of...
We need anthropocentrism to a degree.
Anthropomorphism. Yeah. To a degree.
You don't need anthropocentrism at all.
No. So where I think it's a real problem is when it is really problematic anthropomorphism that is not backed up by any kind of science, where, like you say, dressing up animals in outfits because these are my children. They don't want to be dressed up.
So the language associated with that would be like using the word children.
For your companion animals. Yeah. And also saying things like, oh, she loves this. How do you know that? Yeah. Do you understand animal behavior well enough to make that claim?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if you throw a ball for a dog and they love chasing and bringing back, and you can see wagging tail, all those things, all those classic happy dog signs, you can infer they are happy. But a lot of these, like, oh, she loves it when I do this, or he loves it when I, like, you don't know that.
Yeah. Maybe she's stepping around like that because she just hates the little booties. Maybe she's actually not enjoying it at all.
And I actually cringe. I get tagged so often in these like animal videos where dogs will have these little hats put on them or stupid things, you know, put a dog on a skateboard or whatever. And I'm like, I understand you think it's cute, but it's not cute. Like, they're clearly uncomfortable. And if you know, like, basic animal behavior, like, you'll see the whites of eyes, like, freaking out.
Like frozen stiff body.
Yeah, like all these signs that the dog is not happy at all. And people are just like, this is so funny. How cute is this? And it's really not. So that's going a little bit off the language topic, but it still relates to anthropomorphism and like assuming that if you think something's cute or funny, that the animal is having a good time.
Well, I think it's still relevant anyway, because the language and how we treat them kind of go back and forth and inform each other. It's not purely language. Sometimes how we treat them is going to inform the language.
And vice versa. Yeah.
So
totally.
I think it's worth mentioning. But you shared a thing a while ago about how you didn't want to be called like a dog mom and have like fur children.
Yes.
How does that link?
Donna Haraway in Manifestly Haraway says something that really kind of hit home to me, because I'm like, damn it, I do this all the time. I'm a terrible person. But a lot of us, I think, call our companion animals like part of the family, but we kind of go a step further and say like, I'm a dog mom, or I'm a cat mom, or my fur kids, you know, and it seems sweet. And I still kind of feel a little bit of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can see the overt problem.
Yeah, well, you're a bunny dad too, so you wouldn't. So
I love my fur kids.
Yeah, I mean, we both use this language all the time, but something that kind of challenged me, I'll put it that way. I won't say I 100% agree or disagree, but it challenged me, was Donna Haraway in her book Manifestly Haraway says, I resist being called the mom to my dogs because I fear infantilization of the adult canines and misidentification of the important fact that I wanted dogs, not babies. I love this quote.
I like that idea of like, I didn't want kids. I wanted dogs.
So there's a number of reasons why I think this is a really important quote and why it like really appealed to me. Because as someone who doesn't want human babies myself, I can relate to this. I know the horror, the shock.
Your biological clock is ticking.
I know, man. I know. Such a disgrace to my biological calling.
Yeah, what are you here for if not to have kids?
I know, right? I don't even know.
Just talk shit on a podcast.
So, as someone who loves my companion animals very much, I do sometimes feel that that is belittled in a sense by some kind of family and friends, maybe not intentionally, but who have kids and kind of think like it's not really a big responsibility to look after these animals, or it's almost like an, oh, cute, you know, maybe one day you'll have real kids.
Oh, like referring to them as practice children or something.
Yes, and I'm just like, okay. Not the point at all. But anyway, it's kind of like belittling, like, you know, one day you'll really be a mom, you know. So in that sense, I also think it's important to not call them my fur kids, because I want to make it clear I'm not trying to replace human children. If I wanted human children, I would adopt one or have one of my own. I don't want that. So
rather adopt.
Yes, I know. I'm just saying if I don't want to, so it's irrelevant. I would definitely adopt. But the first part of this as well, where she says, I fear the infantilization of the adult canines. You know, if I think of the dogs and cats that I live with, they are not children. They are adults. They are adults of their own species. And to refer to them as children takes away their agency. And yes, they rely on me for food and care and shelter and all of that stuff, but they are not babies.
But you are their caretaker.
Caretaker, yes. Guardian, yes. But to call them a child, I think is problematic. I don't think it makes like a huge issue in their life or anything, but I think it's important language, because we are then putting them in a role that they did not choose and that they cannot possibly fulfill. They are not my children. I'm not raising them to be adult humans. And I think that's where, you know, these ideas of putting ridiculous outfits on dogs comes in, because it's like, oh, but she's my child.
Infantilizing them.
Yeah. She's not your child, and she doesn't want to wear that stupid dress, Deborah. You know what I mean? So I think it's an important distinction to realize, like, yes, you are their caretaker, you are their guardian, but they are not children.
I mean, I'm trying to think as well, you know, like if my parents were hanging out with their friends, my dad would talk about my brother and I as his kids.
Yeah.
Even though we're adults. You know, and
yeah, but you are biologically his children.
Yeah, I get that. It's just not infantilizing though. It's always use children.
Sure,
kids, you know?
I get your point. Yeah, I mean, you can have adult children.
Yeah, and you can refer to your kids while into the adult life, you know. Sure,
but how many times do people refer to their adult canine or feline companions? How often do they treat them as independent adult children?
That's
they don't.
true.
There's this very much. I mean, even if you look at the problematic dog breeds where there's like pugs or Pekingese dogs, where they are bred for certain characteristics that are appealing to humans but have serious health concerns for the animals. The reason they are often bred that way is because of the very infant-like qualities that they then portray. So the cuteness and the
helplessness,
the clumsiness, and oh, shame, like this dog is snoring, all cute, and like it's very, very infantilizing, very babying of them.
Yeah, that's true.
So even though you can refer to a human child as your child as an adult, you're not doing that with animals. You're often belittling them and saying, oh, cute little puppy, even when they're adults, you know.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate here to explore the argument. So
sure.
I'm also wondering if there are contexts where it's okay. You know, so I understand if your non-vegan family comes over, they talk about your fur kids, or if you talk about your fur kids, how for them that could be almost implying like, these are my fur kids until I get my human kids. Or
I guess on the flip side, it could also be legitimizing them as individuals.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say.
I have often said, when people have said to me, when are you having kids? And I'm like, I've already got 4, thanks.
Yeah.
You know?
Or like I have people, you know, even family members joke about eating rabbits. And I'm like, but my rabbits are like children to me. Why would I eat my child? You know, it's like it would be the same as me eating a person.
Yeah, I think that's got some legitimacy there to say, you know, when I refer to my fur kids, or I actually don't like that word, but like when I say they're like my children, it is legitimizing them as individuals and saying, you know, I don't need to have human children to have a family, and they are just as worthy of concern
as children.
Yes, and even so, as much as I've said this stuff myself many times, and you know, I don't have an issue with you calling yourself a bunny dad. Or
also, what I was going to say was, we are both vegan and understand speciesism, and not necessarily that you have to be vegan to get this. Do you know what I mean? But I don't think me calling myself a bunny dad or something has ever made you assume that I think of my companion rabbits as like
baby little
like
children,
baby little object child that I dress up.
Again, I think you make a good point in that it's not necessarily damaging, but I think it's worthy of consideration.
Yeah.
And it's made me think a lot about the language that I've used, because I think it would be equally powerful if someone says, when are you having kids? And I say, I have a complete family unit already. I don't have to refer to them as my children to acknowledge them as part of a family. It's not a related family. It's like, you know, if you have someone who moves into your house and becomes part of the family because they have nowhere else to go, and you see them as part of the family, it doesn't mean that they become your child. And that would be demeaning. If you have an adult moving in with you because they're stuck and you welcome them as part of your family, and then to say, oh, this is my adopted child, that would be super demeaning, you know? I
mean, it could at the same time be like endearing if it was an older person.
What if it's an immigrant?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know there would be contexts where it would be terrible, obviously. But say, I suddenly lost all my family and this sweet old couple took me in.
And referred to you as their son.
Yeah, or their child, you know? And it would be like an endearing kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess. But the thing is, like, I think with non-human animals, even when you're talking about your bunnies or whatever, when you're talking about them as kids, if you think about how we see children as kind of like these helpless, vulnerable, in need of care individuals, most children are not really given much choice because they don't know much about the world yet. So their parents are making very important life decisions for them. And sure, we are caring for companion animals in a similar way. But I think what's important about this is acknowledging not only the age of the animal, but the fact that they are individuals with their own needs. So in the same way as your parents will still refer to you as kids, they acknowledge Peter's an adult now. He makes his own life decision. I still love you as my child. I still want you to be happy and protected and safe, but I can't tell you what to do. Now, when we talk about animals that live with us as children, when we frame them as children, children are humans that still need guidance and to be told what to do.
And taken care of. And
and yes, we're taking care of them, we're feeding them all that stuff. But I think that's also where we miss a lot of the understanding of animal behavior. And, you know, you'll see stories of dogs biting kids and then the dog has to be euthanized. And nobody mentions that there was like a 2-year-old kid hanging around this dog's neck every day.
Yeah.
That there was growling, that there were hackles up, that there were all these warning signs that the dog is not happy. So then the dog snaps and bites the child and will need to be euthanized because he or she is seen as a vicious dog. And I think if we were to acknowledge the fact that they are not our fur children or our, you know, non-human babies, we would recognize that as adult members of their own species, they have their own behavioral needs, they have their own environmental needs, and those deserve to be respected. It's not like when you're raising a child and you say, go to your room, you know, not that I really think kids should be ordered around, but you make decisions on their behalf. Whereas I think if you acknowledge, and we're getting pretty nuanced here and like philosophical, but if you can acknowledge that an adult animal has their own needs, wants, desires, and characteristics as their species, you'll be more likely to pay attention to their behavioral cues, their environmental needs, and not just look at what role they play for you and looking at it as, I have this power over you, I'm looking after you, I give you things. It's also about, what are you trying to communicate to me from your species perspective? Yeah.
So it's difficult because it's like kind of a gray language area. Do you know what I mean? Because there's some contexts where it's okay. Like if my grandfather says to me, let's make some rabbit stew with your rabbits, and I say that would be like eating children. I'm kind of using his own speciesism against him because he sees children as way more valuable than human children, as way more valuable than rabbits. Do you know what I mean? So that way it's like doing what you said and legitimizing their existence by using his own bias against him for human children. But then the rest of the time I probably wouldn't use it, except when I'm like hanging out with you, for example, and we talk about our furkids. I wouldn't find that offensive at all. It's like, in a way, it's not affecting them in any way if you are with people who get speciesism and understand this, like these terms. Do you know what I mean?
I do get what you mean.
And even adult animals can still be cute.
Sure.
So, yeah.
But by looking at, oh, you're so cute. Imagine you say to your adult friend when they're like, hey, I'm distressed right now. And you're like, oh, that's so cute. Let me cuddle you.
But there are small dogs that are cute.
Yeah, and would you say that if your friend is like, say a dog's scared and you're like, oh, shame is scared. Come here, little one, you know. Versus how you would treat an adult. Like,
yeah, but it's so different because the adult is like completely independent of you.
Yes, but
like
okay,
if we look over at your dogs now sleeping there, they look super cute.
They are super cute, but they don't.
That's so infantilizing.
It's not. Like, they can be cute humans
but
too.
Would you say that to your adult friends who were sleeping on the couch?
No, because that would be weird. Okay. But what I'm saying is basically I don't find it offensive, but I think having these concepts in mind is important because when you're talking about a child, for example, there isn't really, which is, okay, this is a problem in general with like ageist thinking where you belittle children and their ideas because what do you know? You're so young. But think about how the majority of society views young children. It's a case of, while you're under my roof, do what I say. Or you'll learn when you're older. You know, I'm making decisions for you. So when you're coming from that mindset, and I know I'm getting super pedantic and nuanced here,
It's okay.
but when you're coming from that mindset, I think it's important to acknowledge, because if we think about kids like that and we project that onto animals, we're saying, I know what's best for you. I give you the food you need. I give you the shelter you need. I'm not going to listen to you because you don't know any better. Whereas if we recognize that they are adult members of their own species and they may have different capabilities and things like that, we'll be more likely to kind of check in with their needs and their behavioral characteristics and things like that, and be more willing to learn about them.
I agree. Yeah.
Even when you look at like adoption processes from shelters and stuff like that, there would be more awareness like, do you actually understand this species before you adopt them into your home? You know, it's not a child that you just have to feed and clothe and baby like a human child. Each species has their own species-specific food, environments, behavioral requirements in order for their welfare to not be compromised. So if we don't do that and we just lump them in with adult children, we're less likely to look at them as individuals worthy of consideration as individuals.
I understand what you're saying. So it's just, obviously there are some things that are pretty black and white that you do and don't say. But in terms of things like this, it's just really important to be aware of context and the way
possible
it's used.
implications.
Yeah, exactly. Possible implications.
But you can still call yourself a bunny dad and I won't hold it against you.
Thank you. I love my little fur kids.
I still think of my animals as kind of like kids in a sense. But I acknowledge that there's an element of problematic projection onto them.
Yeah. I think there's always going to be problems, but it's important to work through this stuff.
Yeah.
So one other word I wanted to bring up that you often hear in activist and vegan circles is the word carnist, which refers to non-vegans, right? What is I know you have quite strong opinions on this.
I
Betty.
do.
So what do you think about this term?
Okay, so carnism and carnists and all related terms, the concept was kind of coined by Melanie Joy, and she discusses it a lot. I think she did her PhD on it, and then she wrote about it in her book, Why We Love Dogs, Where Cows Eat Pigs. I think that's what
I think so.
Something like that.
She also did a TED Talk. There's also a video.
Yeah. So she talks a lot about how carnism is this like invisible social force kind of thing that we are kind of institutionalized into and socialized into, where we don't see this invisible thing called carnism, where it normalizes the consumption of meat, basically. That's the gist of it. You can watch any of her talks and she'll cover it. I don't really like this concept at all, and I know a lot of vegans and a lot of activists embrace it and use it constantly. It really gets to me for some reason. Maybe it's just a personal thing, but
Well, explain, and then we can see if we agree.
Well, it just irritates me because it feels so unnecessary. What bugs me about the term carnist or carnism, you're giving people a label. So her justification for doing that is saying carnism is a choice, just like veganism is a choice. So she's basically saying everyone acts like veganism is this extreme choice to go against society and whatever. And she's highlighting the fact that non-veganism is also a choice. So you are choosing to be a carnist. I see what she's saying. I kind of agree in a sense that that's true. My problem is it's not really a choice. It's like an unconscious thing when you're raised that way for many people. And she does acknowledge that. But I think putting a label like carnist sounds quite...
It's like othering.
It's othering, and it sounds super judgmental and like accusatory. Like, oh, you're just a stupid carnist, you know? What do carnists know? I don't like the vibe of that. It's like very name-call-y to me. It sounds like you're just name-calling. So I don't really like that aspect of it, and it kind of sounds a bit culty to me. Like talking about
Vegans
carnism and, you know, carnism is this invisible, dominant...
Visible belief system.
Yes, and that's what she calls an invisible belief system. Sounds so like dramatic and wishy-washy. And the fact of the matter is, sexism is an invisible belief system, you know, like homophobia is an invisible belief system. She's basically just explaining socially conditioned ideas.
Yeah,
it happens across so many different fields, and there's already a word to explain that. Speciesism.
Yeah.
Done. You don't need carnism.
Yeah.
There's already a word.
I mean, also carnism really sounds like carnivore is the like root,
Yes.
so like only referring to meat.
Yeah. So that's also a problem, is that she speaks a lot about the consumption of meat. She almost ignores all the other aspects of veganism. So it focuses so much on animal flesh. And I feel like that will just make a lot of people go vegetarian if they internalize her ideas.
But I mean, she would also be all right with that, right? Because she's one of the proponents of reducitarianism.
Yeah. I mean, she advocates for veganism, but she's also totally fine with Tobias's crew and that whole like...
reducitarianism, yeah.
Yes.
So vegetarianism is okay because...
Yeah, and let's ally with even non-vegans because they can help our cause, which I agree with in a sense. But, you know, she's very, like, apologetic about a lot of it.
Yeah. So carnism actually really feels like it's rooted in reducitarianism to me.
Yeah, that's how it comes across. And there's such a meat focus in everything she talks about that it really downplays a lot of other aspects that are important in veganism and animal rights. So I think it's kind of silly in a way to even use it when we have racism, sexism, speciesism. Why add carnism? What's the difference between carnism and speciesism?
Yeah, it's
and
more focused, like less helpful.
Yeah.
term.
And I think in one of her interviews, I think it might have been on the Arizona podcast, she says that speciesism is like too hard for people to kind of understand or internalize or something. I don't know what her...
It is quite difficult to say, to be honest, just in terms of the practical word. Like it's like got an extra... It's hard not to write speciesism.
Yeah.
Like it's you don't want to write
Speciesism.
like species. It's like it's a weird word. It's not as easy to say as sexism.
Yeah, but once you know it, you know it.
Yeah.
Like, also my problem with carnism is, like you said, it sounds like carnivore. I can totally see people that are really resistant to veganism being like, yes, I'm a proud carnist.
Yeah, they own
I'm
the
a
term.
carnivore at heart.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds cavemanish, and it sounds like something people would, as an opposition to veganism, they would just
Yeah.
claim it.
I can
and be
imagine like a steakhouse renaming their like meat supreme pizza to like carnist pizza
carnist heaven or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that just being embraced by non-vegans. So to me, carnism is unnecessary because we already have speciesism, and you can just explain it to people, even if it's a little bit tricky to say. We don't need the word carnist because we have non-vegan. In the same way that we have a problem with the fact that it's like human, non-human, because human is then the default. In this case, it's good. Vegan should be the default. So you are either vegan or non-vegan.
Yeah.
So to say, oh, you're making a conscious choice to be a carnist, just say non-vegan.
Carnism is also a lot more complicated to explain. Do you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
if you say speciesism, you're like the bias for or against individuals based on species membership.
Yeah.
Super simple. Carnism, you have to say, invisible ideology or belief system that forces us to consume animals.
Yeah.
I mean, how would you? It's really not as basic.
I mean, I've read the
explain.
book and I still can't explain it eloquently.
Yeah.
So, I mean, she probably can, but how many people can?
So I agree with you on the carnism, and I think there's a lot of terms. The more we talk about this, the more terms pop into my head in terms of language that we use. I know you feel the same way, but sometimes it feels like vegans really use inappropriate or incorrect terms as well for referring to what happens to animals, such as like rape, or they draw analogies to the Holocaust. I personally have like a massive issue with that, but I think we've got quite far in this episode.
Yeah, I think this is already pretty full length, but those are really good points that you raised, and I think that we could probably have a whole other conversation. This was quite a basic level discussion on language, so I think we can delve a lot deeper into those more complicated and more controversial terms.
Well,
So
let's do it. Let's have another episode.
we could. If you're listening to this and you want us to have an episode on those kind of words and those kind of controversial issues related to language, let us know. We'd be happy to do a follow-up, more, in-depth look at language.
And also tell us if there are any terms that you grapple with yourself, or the things that we've completely missed and things that you've noticed. We'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I think we stuck to just the basic common ones. So if there are ones that you think are pretty important that get used often either in activism or day-to-day conversation, please send us an email, mail@letsragetogether.co.za.
Yeah, or hit us up on Facebook or Instagram.
yeah, so thank you so much for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. Please feel free to mail us or DM us or whatever with your questions, comments, and feedback. Until next time,
Love and liberation.